Hi, welcome to the File Level Backups module for the System Administrator course. By the end of this module, you'll be able to determine which backup approach to use based on your configuration. You'll also be able to configure and run file level backups using Unitrends best practices. We're first going to take a look at determining your backup approach. How you back up your assets really depends on, first of all, your server hardware implementation. In other words, if I have physical servers, they definitely have to run file-level agent-based backups. Some virtual machines you'll see, there are cases where you may want to run a file-level agent-based backup even though it's a virtual machine. We'll talk about some of those scenarios today. Then you want to start looking at your data retention and data recovery requirements. How long do you need to keep your backups? Do you need to be able to keep individual incremental changes throughout weeks and months? And what are my recovery point objectives? Right, we're going to also look at the recovery point objective factor in determining how frequently you run your backups throughout the day, throughout the week. We're really going to focus, though, on the Unitrends best practices around our file level agent. We'll give you some great tips on the Unitrends kind of ways of doing file level backups across the majority of your machines. You're going to want to run agent-based file level backups if you, for one, need to bare metal recover the OS. This includes the boot volume and critical disk metadata. So if you have a physical server out there that you definitely need to recover the OS, possibly moving it to different hardware, you're definitely going to want to run a file-level agent-based backup against that machine. Now, if you need to configure includes or excludes at the file and directory and volume level, you may consider using an agent. With virtual snapshots with Hyper-V and VMware, it's not fully excluding down to the file and folder level. With VMware, you can do VMDK exclusions at the virtual disk level, and Hyper-V today is the full machine or not at all. And then also, if you need to run pre or post commands on the client agent, you can pass those through the agent before you run a backup, and after you run a backup, you can run start and stop commands, pre and post commands. You do that through the client agent. Through our file level agent, we can pass that pre-command, stopping a database. After the backup job finishes up, we can start it back up if you need those things to happen. It's usually on more of the Linux and Unix side, but we can do it for Windows machines as well too. And now also you're going to have to run agent-based file level backups if you have configured any RDM through VMware, or if you have sparse disks through Hyper-V. Right? If you've gone to those guest through the guest operating system and configured remote disk or remote storage, then you have to use an agent through the guest to be able to see those new volumes and back those volumes up. If you go to the hypervisor to create those new virtual disks, then you can virtual snapshot those. That's the big difference. Now also run file level backups through the agent if you have any virtual domain controllers. It's not a best practice to virtually snapshot your domain controllers. Then, of course, if you're running any ESXi free version, you have to use our file level agent and treat those machines like physical machines, because in the free version, it's unlicensed for the backup and recovery API set in there. We have to treat those like physical machines, run agent-based file level. You can bare metal them right back into the free version of VMware. We just have to use an agent-based backup on them because we're locked from the VMware snapshot capability. Also run agent-based file level backups if you're running any Exchange, SQL, SharePoint, or Oracle, and you can't use the Unitrends application agent. Make sure you're running file level backups across those machines, and in the Exchange, SQL, SharePoint, or Oracle instance where you can't use our application agent, you want to make sure that you're running some sort of maintenance routine and dumping a flat file out, and we're going to pick up that backup in our file level backup. You want to review each application module to determine if you can use that application agent. Those are in separate modules throughout this course. Most can, but there are some exceptions in there. Once again, if you can't use the agent, you're going to run a native application backup, some sort of maintenance routine or a dump, then we're going to pick that up with our file level backup through our agent. When we take a look at how file level backups work, we start with looking at kind of a high level overview of the file level backup job process for Windows. And it starts by looking at the Unitrends appliance on the left-hand side. And the first thing that happens when we schedule a job or we manually queue one up, what's called the tasker creates a job in our queue, and it waits for the resources to become available. We have so many concurrent connections to run on that appliance, and it's going to run so many jobs at once. And if there's no other jobs running, it'll go from queue to active right away. But it may have to stay in a queued state until some more resources become available. The second thing that happens is it becomes active once it starts up, and it contacts the server via the agent. So it goes out into the Windows machine, and through the Unitrends agent, it makes contact with that server. The agent receives that contact, and it creates the backup by taking a disk snapshot using VSS and the change journals, and it creates the backup for me. Whether it's a full or an incremental, depends on the type of backup that you run or that's scheduled, but it's the same concept. It uses VSS to snapshot and the change journals to snapshot and create the backup. That backup is then copied back to the Unitrends appliance. Right, the backup summary is then sent. Once the job is sent over, the appliance then logs the job summary and updates the job status to say that it was successful or completed. When we look at Mac, right, a little bit different. It does send that tasker, and the tasker does create the job and wait for the resources. It contacts the agent the same, but then in the Mac world, it launches or it uses LaunchD and creates the backup through LaunchD. It copies that backup same back to the Unitrends appliance. Then it sends that job summary once that's done, and the appliance will then log the job as successful and completed. Overview of file-level backup jobs for Linux and AIX and HPUX. They're all really common, Unix and Linux-based. Tasker creates that job once again, waits for the resources to become available, sends that job over through the agent, process the same so far, but then in the Linux and AIX and HPUX world, it uses myNotify to track the changes on the local file system in a journal, and that process helps us create the backup. Based on the type of backup, once again, we're going to go in and find just those changes for incrementals. That backup is created, and it's copied to the Unitrends appliance once again. Once that process is done, it creates a backup summary, sends that over to the appliance, and we mark the job as completed as well too. Now, Linux is the only OS that uses Journal for file-level backups. The other ones use myNotify. The file-level backups protect your server at the volume level. So you may also want to create snapshots or application backups for additional protection. So when it talks about snapshots, it may be a virtual machine that you're only using the agent on one file or folder. You're not grabbing the C drive, the operating system, the boot volume. And the additional backups for application backups for additional protection, that's referring to SQL, Exchange, Oracle, SharePoint, those application agent level backups. If you're running those applications, the file level agent does not grab those databases by default. If you run application agent backups, then you can recover those databases through the application agent backups. What we're talking about is file level backups here. If I need to recover the entire operating system of a machine, the entire machine, then I better be running file level backups if it's a physical machine, or I could once again be running hypervisor snapshots across a virtual machine in the virtual environment. And if I'm running those file level backups and hypervisor snapshots, then I have the ability to put the entire server back, and then once the server's back, then I can put my databases back through the application agent backup. Okay, once again, for more details about when to run applications or hypervisor agents, see our other modules too. Check out the Exchange, SQL, Oracle, SharePoint modules for those applications in particular. File-level backups capture local volumes and system state data. Kind of goes back to that previous slide. So when we run a file-level backup, we're capturing the system state, which is the registry, the COM+ class registration database, the boot files. That includes the system files. We're also grabbing DFS and namespace replications too. For domain controller system states, we grab all that same stuff, except we don't do any DFS namespace replications, but we do the sysvol directory and the Active Directory domain services. That's when you run file level backups across the agent and we back up the system state, which we do by default. We talk about setting up your file level backups. To set up your file level backups, first you'll need to install the required components. You'll consider your schedules based on your recovery needs. Once again, we talked about that a little bit earlier, our RPO, Recovery Point Objective. We're also going to make sure we take a look at the data size, the used data size, and the rate of change of our machines too. If I've got a larger server that changes frequently that I need to back up every couple of hours, That's going to, make a determination on how I set up my recovery points, my schedules. We're also going to make sure we look at our storage and free space requirements, making sure that the appliance can handle bringing on a server that big, making sure I can run that frequent of incrementals and keep that many days worth of changes with that rate of change. We're also going to show you how to create the recommended backup jobs in certain scenarios, right? Once again, these backup scenarios we're going to show you in all these modules, they're not guaranteed to work in every environment. Once again, you're going to want to check with your vendors, your third-party solutions. When do they recommend backing up those types of machines, the machines in your environment? Most machines, though, can go on the type of schedules we're going to show you today. When we start breaking down the installed required components, the latest version of the Unitrends agent on a supported platform. Once again, you want to check that compatibility matrix. I know we talk about it in the fundamentals course. You're going to use that compatibility matrix a lot. So make sure whatever operating system you're trying to install our agent on, you're trying to get backups on, make sure we support it. Check that compatibility matrix first. The Unitrends agent for the Windows machines uses NT Authority as the system account. That account has full control to all local files and folders. One cool thing about Unitrends they got rid of years ago, you don't have to install our agent as a specific account and then worry about that account having rights. Our agent, our service runs as the Windows system account, the NT Authority account, and that account already has full control. Now, if you do have backup warnings that pop up and they do say access denied, the result may be a change in permissions. Go to your file and folder structure and make sure that the system account has full control. Now, we're also using VSS Shadow Copy. We're using VSS in there to do the backup. So we're going to QS your machine, QS your disk. We're going to grab those disks as they sit, and we do that copy off the disk, off the machine through that VSS Shadow Copy service. So we need to make sure that VSS is installed in not a freezed state or a thawed state. It needs to be in a running good state. Now, your recovery point objectives, they really drive your backup frequency. If you've sorted out your servers, you've got your tier 1, your tier 2, your tier 3, you've done your cattle, pets, and people, and you've got your servers organized by some priority. If your data loss tolerance is 1 day or more, then just run a daily incremental forever, just once a day, or you could run a weekly full and a daily differential. Once again, that's going to depend on your rate of change. A weekly full and a daily differential is going to give you the fastest recovery. It's not real big differences when we talk about our synthetic process because we do create synthetic fulls underneath there. But a larger server with a higher rate of change, if you can run a weekly full with a daily differential, it's going to give you your fastest recovery. Now, your data loss tolerance is less than a day. You can run incremental forever, but your recurrences are going to be based on your recovery points. So if I have a server that needs 12-hour, 6-hour, 4-hour recovery points, I can't lose more than 4 hours, 6 hours, 12 hours worth of data, then I'm going to schedule my backups to run every 12 hours, 6 hours, 4 hours, back to back to back, Monday through Friday, or 7 days a week, depending on my business model, depending on my rate of change throughout the week and weekend. Now, if you want to complete your backups within a few hours during the week, you can run incremental forever, or weekly full and daily incrementals as well too. Once again, that rate of change is going to come into there in that play for you. You're going to schedule more frequent recovery points for incrementals during the week to keep your size down. If you've got a bigger server that has a high rate of change and you're having a hard time getting those changes done every 6 hours, every 4 hours, you might want to start running them every 1 or 2 hours to get them smaller and get the changes done more frequent. Once again, it's going to depend on the type of change in that scenario. If people are saving the same documents over and over again, or if they're creating new. Now, if you want to control when full backups run, then you need to run your own weekly full, put it on the schedule, and run your own weekly full. We're going to create a synthetic full for you. It's never a guarantee, never longer than 14 days in between them. We're going to talk about that next. Now, the weekly full and the daily differential or incrementals. Still going to want to run that daily backup, whether it's differentials or incrementals, doesn't matter to us. Once again, depending on rate of change, usually people want to run incrementals. They don't need that differential every day. If you're replicating or archiving, we're going to build a synthetic differential from those incremental changes every day as well too. Now, if you want to control your synthetic full backup, you cannot control synthetic full backups. First and foremost, first point, everybody always asks me, how can I schedule my synthetic full backups? Well, you can't. Once again, the default is every 14 days as long as the system has enough storage to retain the incremental change rate between those 14 days. How many recovery points are you configured for during the day, and how big are those incrementals breaking down to be? Do I have enough storage to keep 14 days worth of that change rate, or do I need to create a synthetic every 10 days, every 7, every 5? The tighter my storage, the more frequent you're going to run your own synthetic backups so it can purge the incremental changes when it needs to. Now, when you create a new backup job, you'll select your machines, your clients, through the agent-based assets, and then you have some job settings that you can set in those jobs. You can do the include and exclude list we talked about. So if I don't want any AVIs or MP3s or media type of extensions off of home working directories, I can exclude those from the backups. People abuse that space all the time. You just want to make sure that you're not applying a list like that to a server that you need those extensions off of. But you can also exclude at the entire folder and volume level through the job settings as well too. So if you have a server that has an older archive drive that has a bunch of old data on it, you don't want to back up that data anymore, you can exclude that S drive or that R, T, V, whatever that drive volume letter is as well. Maybe it's a particular folder on that drive you want to exclude. You can exclude that too. Very dynamic. The include list is really cool because if you're doing a group of workstations, maybe you only want the users and document settings folder, you can create an include list for that on that machine or that group of machines and only back up those users and documents and settings folders. Maybe you don't want to grab the whole machine. We do have a set of default exclusions. By default, our agent will not back anything up that is exclusively locked. We talked about that a little bit earlier. Those SQL, Exchange, SharePoint, Oracle type of database objects, we won't grab them. We can't. Any temporary files, we don't try to grab. Right? We do grab the recycle bins for you, so you want to make sure you exclude those if you don't want them. It can save you some space. Just remember you're not backing those up. There is a list of our default exclusions in the administrator guide as well for you. Do a search for the Windows file level agent-based exclusions. And there's also a list of default Linux-based exclusions as well too. There is a maximum file path name length for exclusions. It used to be like 256. Now it's way beyond that. I think it's 1024 or larger even. Just be aware of that. It can't be some crazy long, ridiculous path name. But it's most paths I've seen today. You can keep your backup sizes down by configuring lists. These lists are include or exclusion lists. They exclude your data, and you can do this by directory path, file name, and by file type. Some exclude list examples are if you only need data from one directory on an older server, you can exclude everything but that one directory and keep the operating system as well too. Keep the C drive and the critical disk metadata. Now you can also do media file extensions. We talked about that a little bit earlier. It might be asterisk.avi, MP3, MOV, any of those media type of extensions. Usually only your home and user working directories though. Not a exclusion you want to put into the file server media department's working directory, right? You can also exclude user directories when you don't need user information off of servers. So if you know you only want to back up the true server and anybody that logs in after the crash and recovery is going to have their account be recreated from the domain maybe, you may want to exclude the users directory to keep down some of that space too. If people are out there doing work on the machines, they're downloading files and junk to the machine, you maybe not want to back that stuff up. Now, keep in mind that wildcards are not supported in exclude list for Linux, Unix, CIFS, NFS, or NAS clients. Now, with a few include list examples, like maybe you only want to include one volume or one directory. Maybe you don't want the operating system. Maybe you only want the S or the F or the T. Maybe you've got 20 other servers just like it, and you'll clone the bare metal or virtual snapshot from another machine and then restore that volume. Maybe you only want to back up the user directories on workstations. We talked about that a little bit earlier too. You have a group of workstations out there. I may want to include a list to grab only the users and document settings folders. Maybe you don't want to back up the whole OS of a machine. You just want one directory or one volume. Once again, you can grab just that directory, just that whole volume. You can even just grab one file over and over again if you point to one file for an include list. Once again, wildcards for includes are not supported either. I can't go and say, hey, I want to back up all the .docs, all the .excel on a machine. Sounds like a dream, but if you were to lose the machine, how do you put it back if you're only backing up the Excel docs or the Word doc? Remember, we're grabbing the OS, the boot volume, everything off of that machine through the file level backups as well. Keep in mind also that selection lists don't apply to bare metal backups. There's no include or exclude lists with those hot bare metal backups. Those are for 2003 servers only. It's the image-based legacy hot bare metal for 2003. Those don't have include and exclude lists. And currently today, you can only create a bare metal schedule through the legacy interface. So for 2003, to recover the OS, you may need to create a hot bare metal backup. The last note down there is that you can use inclusion and exclusion lists in combination, but you have to be careful with them. Keep in mind that your exclusion list has to be rooted from your inclusion list. So if I go down and say I want to include the users directory, but I want to exclude all AVIs, that's okay. But if you go in and say I want to exclude the user directory public, that's okay as well. The minute I go and say I want to exclude the Windows directory or ctemp, that becomes an invalid list because it's already excluded by saying we only want to include the users directory. So be careful when you use includes because you're narrowing it down to say, hey, I only want this now. So be careful with includes. Here's examples of applying an exclusion list. So if you have a Windows server with some docs, some MP3s, some AVIs on it, and we create an exclusion list for this server that says I want to exclude the E drive and I want to exclude any AVIs or MP3s, if I run backups against it using this specific list, then the backup would come out with files in C drive that say F1 and F2.doc. That would be the only thing grabbed up if I applied a list like this to this server. Pretty cool how they work. Examples of applying both an inclusion and an exclusion list. So I may have said, hey, I want to build a list that says I want to grab the users. Right, there is no wildcards for file types. Now, if I say I want to include users and I want to exclude users public, when I run a backup against this, I would see all of the users over there but my public user. This is kind of our list of our default exclusions. We talked about it a little bit earlier as well. We do exclude the recycle bin, any file names or path names with %temp, and any *.tmp and *.temp as well too. There is a little bit more detail in the admin guide, once again, on the default exclusions for our file level Windows Server backups as well too. Once again, this is just a continuation of the exclusions by default. We're not going to grab any all users, Microsoft Network downloader cache, no system32 config or cat root, and we're not going to grab the Win386 swap file either. Can't use them on recovery. No sense in backing them up. We do exclude a few things off the registry, the Microsoft Windows, HKLM software, Microsoft Windows, the current control set for the backup restore, the current version profile list, and in that profile list there's app data, local temp, and temporary internet as well too. Some applications that we don't grab by default, we talked about a few of these earlier as well. Exchange and SQL databases in the log directories, we can't grab them. They're exclusively opened by those operating systems or those applications. Any files owned by Exchange, Hyper-V, or SQL applications, can't even grab them. SQL files with extensions MDF, LDF, and NDF are excluded only if the SQL VSS component runs on that Windows server. Files that exceed maximum file path name lengths will not be backed up. We talked about that maximum path length for the exclusion list or inclusion list, but here we're talking about a little bit different. These are the path names for the entire file structure itself. If you have files that exceed the maximum file path name length, they won't be backed up. So for our agents running Windows, that max is 32 KB, 32 kilobytes. For Linux, it's 4 kilobytes. For Solaris and Mac, it's only 1 kilobyte each. Once again, check your backup warnings for files that were skipped or missed. If you have a path name that's too long, it's going to tell you in the output with a warning, in the details in that warning. Check your backup warnings, check the details for files that were skipped or missed. Incremental Forever, this is our recommended backup approach for the majority of your servers. Once again, if you need quicker recovery times on your more critical servers, your people and pets, then, or your tier 1, your tier 2, then you're going to want to run weekly fulls, run your own weekly fulls, especially on domain controllers and servers with a extreme high rate of change. If you want the fastest recovery possible on those, we'll still back them up all day long with Incremental Forever just by themselves. But if you want the fastest recovery possible, you want to make sure you're running your weekly full on those machines. Now, most machines are way under 25% rate of growth. You'll notice if you have a machine that's growing that fast, that big every week. You'll know. It's a very extreme case. Now, Incremental Forever, the result is it's lower in network and server utilization. If we're only going back to your servers once a day, twice, 2, 3, 4 times a day, and grabbing just those changes, it's using less network resources, and it doesn't take as long for your server to build the change to send those changes to us rather than snapshotting the entire server. Now, Incremental Forever is supported on virtual systems, right? Our UB, Unitrends Backup, and our Recovery Series from the R212 and all the newer physical systems as well, too. Incremental Forever is great. Never run those fulls every week. The majority of your servers, it works great on. Right? It can be scheduled against any Windows XP or later client, so pretty much all the Windows agents, and then check for supported Linux clients. There are a few versions of Linux we don't support Incremental Forever on, and when you install the agent on Linux, at the end of the install, it usually tells you if we support Incremental Forever or not. Check that compatibility matrix for the agent that you need for the operating system that you're trying to protect. Make sure we support it. Best practices for file level backups. Once again, run that Incremental Forever when possible. You don't need to run weekly fulls anymore on the majority of your machines. Most servers are cattle and only need to be ran once a day. You only need to run a backup once a day. Whether it's incremental 7 days a week or 5, that's going to determine on your operating system, business hours, things like that as well too, your maintenance windows. Once again, consider setting excludes on C users folder on cattle servers to cut down on backup capacity size. If you don't need all those user settings when people log into those servers and do things on the servers, if you don't want that user data, you can exclude it, but only on your cattle. You wouldn't exclude the user directory data on your file server. That's not what we're talking about here. Make sure you keep your business critical server repository on a server if you're running file level backups. Don't download and keep your business software in your user's account on each server. Because if you go around and exclude all your user folders and you're putting all your business critical software installs, your ISOs, in your user accounts on your servers, then this isn't a good practice. The biggest advice I can give you that I fought with for years on the admin side is consider removing old data from your servers to help manage faster recovery times. Nobody ever has time to go back and remove old data from servers and do a proper audit and shrink the sizes back down and make sure the footprint you're running is what you should be. But you don't want to be the guy that has a server crash and has to tell his boss it's going to take 6 hours to recover it because it's this size, and you find out half of that data on it could have been archived off, a year ago, and that could have been half the recovery time. Make sure the servers you're running have the data that you need on it as often as you can. But it's, not anybody's favorite thing to do is go and delete anything off of a server. Feel your pain. But it is a practice to help keep those servers down, not just using our includes and exclude lists, but physically go and trim the fat off your servers through some maintenance and some best practice through Microsoft of keeping servers as tight as possible. Next, we're going to watch the how-to video for create and manage a file level backup.